Imagine this. You go to bed perfectly healthy. No fever, no cough, no sign of illness. Yet by morning, you are dead, gone in the night, taken by something no one could explain, no doctor could cure, and no prayer could hold back. In the age of kings and crowns, when great battles shaped nations and empires rose from blood and steel, there existed an enemy far more terrifying than any sword on the battlefield. It struck without warning. It killed within hours. It spread through towns and palaces alike, and it left behind only fear and corpses. It was called the sweating sickness. This was no ordinary plague. This was the disease that haunted Tudor England, a sickness that terrified not only peasants in their huts, but also nobles in their marble halls. Even the most powerful man in the land, King Henry VIII himself, was driven to paranoia, fleeing from palace to palace, never knowing if the next breath he took might be his last. Picture it, a man in the prime of his life, suddenly drenched in sweat, his heart pounding wildly, his strength collapsing beneath him. Hours later, he is gone, buried before anyone even understands what happened. It was as if death itself walked unseen through the streets of London, touching its victims with a cold, invisible hand. For decades, this mysterious plague tormented England. Then, just as suddenly as it came, it disappeared, vanishing into history, leaving behind only whispers, terror, and questions that remain unanswered to this very day. What was the sweating sickness? Why did it kill so suddenly? Why did it haunt England again and again, and then vanish forever? Welcome to the channel, where we uncover history's darkest secrets and bring to life the mysteries that still echo through the ages. If you are fascinated by forgotten plagues, vanished civilizations, and the strange shadows of the past, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay with us. Because today, we journey back to Tudor England to uncover the forgotten terror that claimed lives overnight. Our story begins in the year 1485, a year of blood, of crowns, and of a battle that gave birth to a dynasty, and unleashed a plague that would terrify generations. The year was 1485. England was a kingdom scarred by decades of civil war. The War of the Roses had turned brother against brother, cousin against cousin, all for the right to wear a crown. But at Bosworth Field, the bloodshed came to an end. Richard III, the last of the Plantagenets, lay dead in the mud, and Henry Tudor, a man long in exile, was crowned King Henry VII, the first of a new dynasty that would shape England's destiny. Yet, as the crown of victory rested on Henry's head, something darker crept silently into England. It arrived like a shadow, trailing behind his triumph. Soldiers returning from the battlefield brought with them more than stories of war. Among them came a sickness, unlike anything England had ever seen before. At first, it seemed like a fever. Men grew restless, unable to sleep, complaining of sudden chills and dizziness. But then the real horror began. Their bodies broke out in an unstoppable sweat, pouring from them as though they were being boiled alive from the inside. Their hearts pounded wildly, their strength drained in moments, and within mere hours, they were gone. The people of London looked on in disbelief. Healthy men who had walked confidently through the city streets in the morning were corpses by nightfall. No time for doctors, no time for prayers, no time even for goodbyes. The priests could not keep up with the funerals. The graveyards filled faster than the bells could toll. Fears spread quicker than the sickness itself. The people whispered that it was a punishment from God for England's sins in civil war. Others muttered that Henry Tudor had brought it with him from across the sea, that his victory had been cursed. A crown won in blood, now tainted with disease. And this was just the beginning. The outbreak of 1485 was only the first. Over the next decades, the sweating sickness would strike again and again, each time more terrifying than the last, leaving trails of corpses and unanswered questions in its wake. But one thing was already clear to the terrified citizens of Tudor England. This was no ordinary plague. It was faster, fiercer, and more merciless than the Black Death itself. By the time Henry VII's crown passed to his son, the larger-than-life King Henry VIII, the sweating sickness had already carved its name into England's memory. But in Henry's reign, its shadow grew darker still. Henry VIII was no ordinary king. Proud, powerful, and obsessed with his own survival, he ruled with a mixture of charm and iron will. Yet even this towering monarch, who could command armies and bend nobles to his will, could not command the sweating sickness. To Henry, it was the one enemy he could never fight with sword or decree. The disease struck without rhythm or pattern. One summer, the streets would be silent, calm. The next, panic would rip through the city like fire through dry wood. Whole households were swept away in a single night. Men who had been drinking and laughing at dinner collapsed before dawn, their bodies drenched in sweat, their faces pale with terror. And always, it happened too fast, too sudden, too merciless. The people named it the sweat, or more chillingly, the night killer. In 1517, one of the most devastating outbreaks struck. London became a city of fear. People shut themselves inside their homes, avoiding neighbors, abandoning friends, terrified that the very air might carry death. Markets emptied, schools closed, churches, once crowded with prayers, stood eerily quiet. No one wanted to stand too close to another soul. The sweat could choose anyone at any time. Even Henry himself was not safe. He fled from one palace to another, moving his court constantly in a desperate attempt to outrun the invisible enemy. He dismissed servants, shut himself away from the crowds, and lived with a gnawing fear that the next victim could be him. It is said that the king's paranoia reached such heights that he would not let strangers near him, fearing their very breath. And yet, despite his power, his riches, and his armies, Henry knew what all of England now knew. The sweating sickness struck without mercy, and once it chose its victim, there was no escape. For the common people, the terror was even greater. They had no physicians worth trusting, no remedies to cling to. What could they do but watch their loved ones collapse, soaked in sweat, trembling and gasping only to be gone within hours? Families who had dined together at night found empty chairs by morning. The toll was not only in lives but in minds. A city, a kingdom, lived in dread. Every cough, every bead of sweat, every restless night might be the first sign of the end. What made the sweating sickness so feared was not only its cruelty, but its speed. Other diseases gave warning. Days of coughing, weeks of fever, months of wasting away. But the sweat gave nothing. It descended like a storm from a clear sky. A man might wake at dawn, cheerful and strong, ready to begin his work. By midday, he would feel a sudden unease, an ache in his head, a restless stirring in his chest, a strange chill racing through his body. Within the hour, the sweat would break. His skin would glisten, then drip, as though every pore had been forced open. Clothes were soaked, sheets drenched, the body bathed in its own unnatural flood. Along with the sweat came panic. The heart raced, pounding so violently that men clutched at their chests in terror. Breathing grew shallow, limbs trembled. Some fell into delirium, muttering nonsense as fever seized their minds. Others sat wide-eyed and silent, fully aware that death was upon them, yet powerless to resist. And then, exhaustion, a crushing weakness, stole over the victim. Muscles refused to move. The body, so recently strong, now felt like stone. Most never made it through the night. Some were dead within 3, 4, or 6 hours of the first symptom. A cruel few lingered until dawn, only to slip away in the morning light. It was this swiftness that horrified the people most. The Black Death, centuries before, had ravaged England with unspeakable loss. But it gave days, even weeks, before it claimed its victim. With the sweat, there was no time for prayer, no chance for farewells, no hope for remedies. Doctors, powerless and bewildered, recommended rest, warmth, and prayer. Some urged victims to remain still and quiet, covered in blankets, hoping the sweat would purge the sickness from the body. Others insisted on sudden movement, brisk air, desperate measures. Nothing worked. Once the sweating began, the outcome was almost always the same. And yet, there was one more layer of terror. For a few, survival was possible. A handful who endured the long night, sweating and shaking, sometimes awoke in the morning weak but alive. These rare survivors walked like ghosts among the living proof that escape was possible, but also a cruel reminder of how few could hope for it. No one could predict who would survive, rich or poor, young or old, strong or frail. It made no difference. Death chose at random, striking down merchants, nobles, scholars, and servants alike. This randomness turned the sickness into something more than disease. It was seen as fate, as judgment, as an invisible executioner moving through the streets of Tudor England. And worse still, it kept coming back. Wave after wave, decade after decade, England braced itself, never knowing when the sweat would return, or how many it would take with it. The sweating sickness did not come just once and vanish. It returned in waves, each outbreak striking terror deeper into the heart of England. And with every return, the fear grew greater, for no one could predict when or where the invisible hand of death would strike next. The first great outbreak after Henry VII's reign came in 1517 during the rule of his son, Henry VIII. London was bustling, the Tudor court glittering with wealth and ambition, when suddenly the streets grew silent. Fear gripped the city as men and women fell in droves. Whole households perished within a single night. Records speak of families dining together in the evening, only for half the table to be corpses by dawn. Panic spread so fast that the capital itself seemed to collapse. Shops closed, schools and colleges emptied. Even Cambridge University was forced to shut its doors, the students fleeing into the countryside. And as the bells tolled endlessly for the dead, Henry VIII himself abandoned London, moving his court again and again, desperate to outrun what he could not see. But perhaps the most devastating wave came in 1528. It began in London, tearing through the city with unmatched ferocity. Nobles and merchants, servants and soldiers, the sickness chose its victims without discrimination. Even the king's closest advisors lived in terror. Some fled to their estates in the countryside. Others locked themselves in their homes, praying that isolation might save them. This time, however, the plague did not stay confined to England. Ships carried it across the sea. Hamburg, Antwerp, and other great cities of northern Europe soon found themselves in the grip of the sweat. Merchants who had come to trade returned home only to carry death with them. Within weeks, entire communities were trembling under the same dreadful symptoms. But strangely, the disease seemed to favor England above all. While Europe suffered briefly, it was the English who endured the heaviest toll, again and again. Then, in 1551, the sweat struck one last terrible time. By now, England had grown used to plague and pestilence, but this outbreak still cut deeper than most could bear. Chroniclers recorded the suddenness of death with horror. Men strong in the morning, dead by the evening. Priests scarcely able to keep up with the burials, the air heavy with the scent of sickness and fear. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the sweating sickness was gone. After 1551, it was never seen again. Not in England, not in Europe, not anywhere in the world. It vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving behind only the stories, the terror, and the unanswered questions. For 66 years, the sweat had haunted England. It had terrified kings, emptied cities, and stolen lives by the tens of thousands. And then it disappeared forever, as if swallowed by history itself. But why so? The disappearance of the sweating sickness is as unsettling as its arrival. For more than 60 years, it stalked England, claiming thousands of lives in wave after wave, and then silence. It never returned. No historian, no doctor, no witness ever recorded it again. What was this phantom plague? What killed so many, so swiftly, and then vanished forever? Modern scholars have wrestled with this question for centuries. Some point to influenza, the ever-changing flu virus that sweeps across the world in unpredictable bursts. Could the sweat have been a strain of flu, more aggressive and deadly than any we know today? Perhaps, but influenza typically spreads far and wide, across continents. The sweat, by contrast, seemed to love England more than any other land. Others turned to the idea of hantavirus, a disease carried by rodents, spread through their droppings and urine. The symptoms: sudden fever, chills, muscle pain, sweating, collapse fit, the description chillingly well. If soldiers returning from war in 1485 had carried infected rodents aboard their ships, it could explain the first outbreak. And yet, why did it vanish? Hantaviruses still exist today, in Asia, in the Americas. Why did England's mysterious strain disappear without a trace? Another theory whispers of anthrax, or even a form of relapsing fever spread by lice. Both could burn through populations rapidly. Both could leave the sweating and exhaustion described. But anthrax leaves clear signs on the body: blisters, sores, blackened marks which the chroniclers of Tudor England never mentioned. The sweat left no scars, only the memory of terror. And so, some have dared to suggest that it was something entirely unknown, the enemy that struck for a season in history, then vanished forever, a virus lost to time. A plague that nature created, unleashed for a brief and horrifying moment, and then erased from the earth. Perhaps that is the most terrifying answer of all, that there are diseases waiting, hidden in the shadows of the natural world, which can appear without warning, strike with unimaginable fury, and then retreat back into silence, leaving us helpless, bewildered, and afraid. For the people of Tudor England, there was no explanation. To them, the sweat was not science, it was judgment. It was a punishment from God, a curse upon the land, a terror they could neither understand nor control. And in a way, perhaps they were right. For what else can one call a sickness that chooses its victims at random, kills them in hours, and then disappears forever into the mists of history? The sweating sickness remains one of medicine's greatest mysteries. A killer that left no trace, no cure, and no answers. Only fear. For more than half a century, the sweating sickness stalked England like an unseen assassin. It arrived without warning, struck with merciless speed, and vanished just as suddenly as it had come. From the muddy fields of Bosworth to the glittering palaces of Henry VIII, it spared no one. Kings fled in terror. Families were torn apart overnight. Entire cities lived in fear of the invisible killer that could sweep them away before the sun had set. And then, silence. After 1551, the disease was never seen again. Not in England, not in Europe, not anywhere in the world. Like a ghost that had unfinished business, it haunted a single age of history and then disappeared, leaving behind nothing but whispers and questions. What was it? A mutant virus? A curse of war? A plague born of man or of nature? We may never know. And perhaps that is what makes it so chilling. For history is full of mysteries, but few are as terrifying as a sickness that kills in hours, strikes at random, and then slips away without a trace. Even today, centuries later, the story of the sweating sickness is a reminder of how fragile human life can be, how little control even kings and empires have when nature turns against them. It is a warning written in history's blood that there are enemies we cannot see, and dangers that may yet return when we least expect them. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there in the world, the sweat still waits. You've just journeyed into one of history's most chilling mysteries. But there are many more stories like this, forgotten plagues, lost civilizations, and shadows of the past that still echo today. If you found this story as haunting as we did, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss our deep dives into the darkest corners of history. Give this video a like and share it with others. And now we ask you, what do you think the sweating sickness really was? A deadly virus, a curse of the Tudors, or something else entirely? Tell us your theories in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, history is never as distant as it seems.